to be wanted, to be loved. But what if that very desire is the reason you're losing yourself? What if the chase for affection, you silence your instincts just to keep someone close, and still it's never enough? Do you know why it hurts so much when they leave? Because deep down, you made them the source of your worth. Every time you looked at them hoping to be seen, a piece of you disappeared. This isn't love, it's dependency wearing perfume. And dependency tears you apart in silence. The Stoics warned us, to need is to be enslaved. They believed the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. But calm doesn't grow in chaos, it grows in solitude. Until you can stand alone without trembling, you will always be at the mercy of someone else's absence. This video will not comfort you, it will confront you. Because you cannot become sovereign until you bury the part of you that begs to be chosen. If you're ready to stop living for others and start reclaiming yourself, consider subscribing. To rise, to mark the moment you chose clarity over chaos, truth over illusion, and freedom over the soft chains of validation. You were told that happiness begins the moment someone else sees you, chooses you, accepts you. That the real story starts not with your own mind, but when someone else validates your existence. From childhood it was everywhere. Fairy tales where fulfillment only arrives with a partner. Movies where the final reward is someone falling in love with the hero. And the casual remarks of well-meaning adults who ask, "When are you going to settle down?" You were handed the idea that being alone was a waiting room for something better. That if you're single, you're somehow incomplete. But here's the truth that rarely gets spoken. If your peace can only exist in the presence of someone else, then it isn't peace. It's dependency dressed up as destiny. What no one told you is that you were never supposed to search for your other half. You were meant to become whole on your own. The Stoics knew this long before it became a catchy quote on the internet. Epictetus said, "Only the educated are free." But the education he meant wasn't found in schools or lectures. It was the education of knowing your own mind, knowing when your thoughts are your own, and when they've been implanted by a world that profits off your need to be chosen. They taught you to chase validation before you even knew what self-worth was. That's not love. That's a training program designed to keep you seeking approval and fearing your own company. And when you seek approval, you slowly trade away your power. You start to shrink in places you should expand. You quiet yourself just to keep someone comfortable. You second-guess your instincts because you're afraid to be rejected. These are not isolated moments. They're daily rituals that over time form a life that doesn't belong to you. And you might call it love, but love that costs you. Your voice isn't love. It's silence forced into a smile. That's why the most dangerous lie you were told is that being alone means something's wrong with you. No, it means nothing is pulling you off your center. If you've ever sat alone and felt that quiet discomfort crawling up your spine, understand this. It's not loneliness speaking. It's withdrawal from the false identity you built to be accepted. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And you cannot do that when your reflection depends on someone else's gaze. You cannot do that when every choice is filtered through the fear of being left. You cannot do that while you still believe solitude is a punishment and not the purest path to knowing yourself. Think about how easily you've given pieces of yourself away. The opinions you've softened, the ambitions you've delayed, the dreams you've diluted so someone wouldn't feel threatened, not because you're weak, but because you were raised to believe that compromise is the price of being loved. But Marcus Aurelius warned us, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. You estimated that rejection was deadly. You believed solitude was shameful, but pain from being alone is not proof that you're broken. It's proof that you've finally stopped distracting yourself and now must face what's really inside. And what's inside you is not empty. It's not flawed. It's unclaimed, untouched, still waiting for you to walk back into yourself without bringing someone else's opinion along. That's the power solitude gives you, the mirror no one else can distort. That is why so few people seek it. Not because it's miserable, but because it reveals too much. It removes the excuses. It asks you to stop pretending you're lost and start admitting you've just never looked inward with honesty. And the moment you do, you begin to reclaim everything that was scattered in the name of being chosen. Dependence whispers that you'll be safe if someone just loves you enough. Stoicism shouts that safety is an illusion if it depends on someone else's behavior. Seneca wrote, "As long as you need validation from others, you're giving them power over your peace." And peace isn't found in holding on, it's found in letting go. Letting go of the need to be seen. Letting go of the idea that your worth rises and falls with someone else's attention. Letting go of the fantasy that love will fix what you're unwilling to face. You don't need to be chosen. You need to choose. Choose to stand still in the discomfort. Choose to peel away the layers of falsehood. Choose to stop waiting for someone to come along and give you permission to feel worthy. That's not strength. That's surrender. And if your definition of love includes surrendering your freedom, it's time to rewrite that definition. The truth is, you were never incomplete. You were interrupted, pulled away from yourself by years of stories that said real life begins when someone else says you matter. But your life isn't on hold. It's happening right now, in the silence, in the space where no one's watching, and where everything you thought you were waiting for is already within you. The Stoics didn't teach detachment as escape. They taught it as clarity. To be able to sit with yourself without fear, without needing, without clinging, that's freedom. So no, you're not broken for being alone. You're just finally unlearning the lie. You're just beginning to hear the truth that's been buried under every soft song and sweet promise that told you love would save you. But you were never meant to be saved. You were meant to be sovereign. And sovereignty doesn't come from being wanted. It comes from no longer needing to be. No one ever told you the price you'd pay for being loved. It's never a dramatic all-at-once sacrifice. It's slow, quiet, barely noticeable. It happens in moments you brush off. A word you didn't say to avoid conflict. A dream you shelved because it made someone uncomfortable. A boundary you softened so you wouldn't seem difficult. These things don't feel like surrender at first. They feel like care, like compromise, like love. But each one chips away at your sense of self until one day you wake up and don't recognize the person looking back at you. Not because you've changed, but because you've been eroded. When you search for validation in someone else, you begin to live outside your own body. You shift your decisions based on how they'll be received. You adjust your energy, your timing, your truth, to make sure you're not too much or too distant. You trade your clarity for comfort, your inner peace for outer approval, not all at once, but in little pieces, and it's subtle, which makes it dangerous. You don't notice it happening until your mind becomes noisy and your spirit feels crowded. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And this is what the trade does. It keeps you facing outward so you never confront what's within. You end up giving your most precious currency, your time, to people who don't know what to do with it. Your energy gets drained trying to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. You pour into others in hopes they'll reflect something back. Something like worth or love or certainty. But no one can reflect what they haven't cultivated in themselves. If they're empty, they can't fill you. And if they're confused, they'll only distort you. Yet we keep bending, giving, shrinking, just for a chance at belonging. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a kind face. The Stoics understood this. They warned that if your peace depends on anything outside of your control, it isn't real peace. It's fragile, borrowed, and always at risk. That includes how people see you, what they say about you, whether or not they approve of your choices. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The nearer a person comes to a calm mind, the closer they are to strength. But a calm mind doesn't grow in the presence of chaos. It doesn't bloom when you're performing. It builds itself in solitude, where there's no one left to impress and no illusion left to maintain." What makes this trade so dangerous is that it feels like survival. You think you're doing what you need to do to keep someone close. You think you're being mature or selfless or understanding. And sometimes you are. But over time, the habit of constantly adjusting for others becomes a pattern. Then it becomes a life. And one day, you realize that every version of yourself has been shaped by someone else's comfort level. That's not identity. That's adaptation. We're not meant to live that way. The soul isn't designed to be constantly edited. It needs room to breathe. It needs silence. It needs stillness. And that can't happen when your attention is scattered in every direction but inward. You start to lose your intuition, not because it's gone, but because the noise has drowned it out. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself, but the adversity we fear most is the kind that requires walking alone, saying no, choosing silence over approval. That's where your self is tested and where it's built." Think of how much you've already given, how many hours you've lost explaining yourself, waiting for a reply, doubting your instincts, rethinking your value based on someone else's mood. These moments pile up. They become weights tied to your focus, distractions wrapped in false hope. And all of it stems from the same quiet belief that you are not enough unless someone else says you are. That lie is heavy, but the truth is heavier because it asks you to stop giving away what was never meant to be negotiated. When you stop chasing validation, you reclaim your power in pieces. At first, it feels unfamiliar. It may even feel wrong, like you're being selfish or distant or cold. But what you're really doing is drawing your energy back into alignment. You're no longer leaking it in all directions. You're redirecting it, refining it, giving it to your goals, your peace, your growth. And suddenly, your mind starts to clear. Not because the world got easier, but because you stopped handing your calmness to people who couldn't protect it. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And how can you know yourself when you're constantly shape-shifting for someone else's love? Wisdom begins when the trade ends, when you realize that what you thought was connection was often compliance, that what felt like being seen was sometimes just being used, and when you finally understand that your value doesn't increase based on how much you sacrifice, but on how much you protect your center, that's when everything changes. This isn't about pushing people away. It's about pulling yourself back. It's about building the kind of strength that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't adjust itself to be palatable. The kind of strength that stands still in the storm because it knows who it is. When you stop making that trade, you'll feel the difference immediately. Not in how others treat you, but in how you treat yourself. You'll stop negotiating your worth. You'll stop over-explaining. You'll stop handing over your inner peace like it's disposable, because you'll know it's sacred. And the truth is, no one can give you what you won't give yourself. Not love, not clarity, not peace. Those things don't arrive when someone chooses you. They begin the moment you stop choosing to be lost. So let the trade end here. Let the silence return. Let the calm mind be your anchor. And let your strength speak not in how much you're willing to lose, but in how deeply you've remembered what you were never meant to give away. There's a reason most people keep themselves busy. A reason they always have music playing, notifications buzzing, screens glowing. Because in silence, something unfamiliar begins to rise. A discomfort, an ache, a voice that hasn't been heard in years. That voice is your real self, buried beneath the noise, and solitude is the only place it knows them. That silence equals failure, that if no one is calling, no one cares. So you run from it, you distract yourself, you stay in places too long just to avoid the quiet. But silence isn't what breaks you. What breaks you is the fear of meeting yourself in it. Solitude isn't a punishment, it's a crucible, a place of heat, pressure, and refinement. It's where everything false begins to melt, where your masks dissolve, your distractions collapse, and all that's left is the truth. Not the version of you that smiles when it's expected, not the version who performs worthiness, but the raw, unfinished, aching version you've hidden away to survive. That version doesn't need followers, applause, or approval. It needs your attention. It needs your presence. It needs you to stop running and just sit still long enough to hear what it's been trying to say all along. And yet, this is what most people avoid, because solitude exposes everything. The anger you've buried, the grief you've numbed, the dreams you gave up on too soon. These things don't show up when you're surrounded by distraction. They only arrive in the stillness. And that's what makes solitude a forge. It doesn't comfort. It transforms. It doesn't decorate the ego. It tears it apart. But if you can stay in the fire, if you can resist the urge to numb, to flee, to reach for someone else's hand, you'll come out the other side with something unbreakable. Not an identity built on validation, but one forged in solitude. That's the kind of presence that can't be taken from you, because it wasn't given by anyone else. It's built, earned, carved out of hours spent alone, face to face with the most difficult truths of who you are and who you're not. People fear solitude because they associate it with emptiness, but it's not emptiness. It's space. Space to think, to remember, to question, to rebuild. Space to ask yourself who you would be if no one was watching, if no one had expectations, if no one was around to reward or punish you for your choices. And most importantly, would you even recognize that person? The answer to that tells you everything. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But most of us have never even knocked on that door. We think our worth is proven in the presence of others, that if people love us, we must be doing something right. But love given to a false self only deepens the illusion. It reinforces a mask that was never truly yours. You become loved for who you pretend to be, and slowly forgotten by who you actually are. Solitude fixes that, not quickly, not easily, but deeply, because in solitude there's no one to impress, no one to protect, no one to perform for, just you and the truth. This is why solitude feels heavy at first, because you're carrying the weight of everything you've ignored. But weight is not always a burden, it's resistance, and resistance is how strength is built. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality. The imagined pain of being alone is often worse than the actual experience. What you find in solitude isn't emptiness, it's clarity. It's the echo of your intuition growing louder. It's the return of your focus. It's the realization that you were never actually lost. You were just surrounded by too much noise to hear your own direction. When you learn to sit in solitude, a strange thing begins to happen. You stop needing as much. You stop explaining yourself. You stop feeling compelled to prove your value, because now you know it, not in theory, but in experience. You've seen yourself without the makeup of performance, without the decoration of praise, without the safety net of someone else's opinion, and you're still standing, stronger, sharper, more grounded. The person who can face solitude becomes unshakable, not because they don't feel pain, but because they no longer fear it. They've faced the fire, they've stayed inside it, and they've emerged with something the crowd can't replicate: self-possession. You no longer chase people who don't see you. You no longer give energy to places that drain you. You no longer try to prove your worth to anyone, because you've already proven it to yourself, in silence, in stillness, in the sacred place where masks fall and truth rises. That's the gift of solitude. That's why it's a forge. So if you're in a season where no one's calling, where you feel invisible, where the nights are quiet and the days feel long, don't run from it. Walk into it. This is your place of power. This is where the noise ends and the real story begins. Not the one they wrote for you, the one you were always meant to live. It starts so subtly you barely notice. A compliment lights you up. A glance makes your heart race. A message left on read leaves you doubting your worth for hours. And slowly, without ever meaning to, you hand over your power to people who were never meant to hold it. You begin to see yourself through their reactions. Their silence becomes your shame. Their approval becomes your identity. You wait for confirmation that you're enough, that you matter, that you're not invisible. But validation, when it comes from outside, is a thief in disguise. It feels like warmth, but it steals your fire. You say yes when your heart is screaming no, just to avoid disappointing someone. You remain in places that drain you because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You silence your opinions, your instincts, your needs, because you think being agreeable is the price of being accepted. And all the while, your life becomes a performance, a collection of small betrayals done in the name of being liked. Not because you're weak, but because you were never taught the strength that comes from standing alone. You were taught that being seen is the goal. But the Stoics knew better. They warned that anything external, applause, opinions, approval, if it can shake your peace, it owns you. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But most people never do. They keep waiting for someone to name them worthy. They put their confidence on layaway, hoping it gets delivered through compliments or relationships. But if your identity relies on how others treat you, it will always be unstable. You'll constantly adjust, constantly shapeshift, constantly negotiate your value through the eyes of others. And that isn't confidence. That's dependence dressed as humility. The need to be validated robs you of your clarity. It makes you question what you know to be true simply because someone else didn't approve of it. You start second-guessing your direction. You delay your growth, not because you're confused, but because someone else didn't clap when you began. You start choosing what looks good instead of what feels right. Carl Jung once wrote, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, it will tell you." And what the world tells you is shaped by trends, opinions, and convenience, not truth. Validation trains you to ask others what you should already be answering for yourself. What makes this even more dangerous is that validation feels good. It feels like safety. It feels like belonging. But belonging that costs your truth is not belonging. It's imprisonment. When you live for the approval of others, you abandon your ability to approve of yourself. You forget how to trust your own gut. You lose the sound of your own voice. And over time, the silence inside becomes so loud that you can't even remember what you wanted in the first place. That's the real price of needing to be seen. You vanish. And here's the most painful part. People can sense it.